Welcome to the debate. So when you hold a perfectly engineered smartphone in your hand, or sit behind the wheel of a modern car, you really feel like the master of a passive tool.
Oh, absolutely.
You tap a screen, it responds.
Right. You press the accelerator, it moves.
It's this incredibly seductive illusion of total human control.
Yeah, we naturally want to view the objects surrounding us as just, mere props on the stage of our lives. Totally neutral until we decide to pick them up and use them.
But the moment you look seriously at design philosophy, that comforting illusion just shatters. We are forced to look at our devices, our infrastructure, even like our disposable coffee cups, and ask a deeply unsettling question.
Which is whether we are using these objects to live our lives, or if these objects are silently scripting how we perceive reality.
Exactly. How they dictate our interactions and how we form our moral values. Today, we're dissecting a fundamental crisis in how we understand the locus of ethical responsibility in design. We're drawing directly from two foundational texts that approach this problem from, radically different angles.
The tension here is fascinating, honestly, because it asks us where the moral weight actually lives. Does ethical design require the human designer to exercise a fierce, conscious duty to reject superficial market forces?
Or is that completely missing the point? We have to consider whether ethical responsibility is actually an inescapable condition of the objects themselves.
Right. Meaning the things we design possess a kind of technological agency that inevitably alters human morality, regardless of what the designer originally intended.
So, from my position, I argue that ethical design fundamentally requires the designer to exercise their moral duty to reject artificial market demands and instead serve genuine social and ecological needs, exactly as outlined by Victor Papanek.
And I will be taking the opposing position. I argue that ethical design goes far beyond the designer's good intentions, requiring us to reckon with Peter-Paul Verbeek's theory of technological agency, where objects themselves actively mediate human perception, making material morality an inescapable reality.
To understand why human intent is the necessary prime mover here, we really have to look at the sheer scale of the harm design can cause when that intent is absent.
You're talking about Papanek's critique from the 70s.
Yeah, exactly. In 1971, Victor Papanek published Design for the Real World. His central thesis was that industrial design had essentially become a dangerous species.
It's a pretty harsh way to frame it.
It is, but he argued it had abandoned its actual purpose, which is solving human problems, and mutated into a servant of advertising and industry.
Right. He was writing at the peak of post-war consumerism. He was watching the entire profession shift from functional problem-solving to aesthetic manipulation.
Exactly. He saw brilliant minds spending their careers tricking people into buying things they didn't need with money they didn't have just to impress people who didn't care.
The classic keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, and he condemned what he called Kleenex culture. It was an entire economic engine relying on designing for the landfill. Planned obsolescence.
Right.
And what's crucial here is the psychological mechanism Papanek identified in the designers themselves. He called them the good Germans of the profession.
Oh, wow. That is a heavy accusation.
It really is. They were compartmentalizing. They would design a luxury, resource-heavy gadget for a wealthy demographic, completely ignore the ecological devastation caused by extracting the plastics and metals, and say, well, I just designed the casing.
Passing the buck, letting the market decide the rest.
Exactly. Papanek argued that this compartmentalization is a profound moral failure. A designer's true moral duty is not to the corporation signing their paychecks, but to the environment and to marginalized populations.
It's a blistering critique, for sure. It places the ethical burden squarely on the shoulders of the person at the drafting table.
Because the drafting table is where the future is literally taking shape. And he didn't just preach. He built a mechanism for this, called the function complex.
Right. Because normally we say a product functions if it just turns on and does its job.
Yeah, but Papanek said that's completely insufficient. True function is a 6-part synthesis. It requires need, which he defines as genuine economic and spiritual necessity, not manufactured desire.
And the telesis part, right?
Yes, telesis is the big one. It means the design must consciously reflect and elevate the actual social conditions of its time. If you design something that works mechanically but degrades the social fabric, the design is fundamentally broken.
Well, look, I agree entirely with Papanek's baseline that design is never neutral. The model of thoughtless, compartmentalized production is a disaster.
So we're on the same page there?
Yes, but I come at it from a different way. Papanek treats responsibility as a heroic crusade. It's like a switch the designer can choose to flip. It's highly anthropocentric.
Meaning it assumes the human is the only moral actor in the room?
Exactly. And this brings us to Peter-Paul Verbeek, who looks at this from a post-phenomenological angle, which is really just a precise way of saying that technology isn't separate from us.
It actively co-shapes our human experience.
Right. Objects are not neutral transmitters standing between humans and the world. When a technology enters the world, it restructures how we perceive reality and how we act within it.
So you are shifting the focus from the creator to the creation.
Completely. Because it changes our actions, it inherently changes our morality. This leads to the concept of distributed or composite moral agency.
Distributed agency. So morality doesn't just live in the human brain?
Right. It is shared with the object. The object has a say. This is material morality. My argument is that even if a designer flawlessly executes Papanek's moral duty, that object will still independently shape human behavior the moment it leaves the factory.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If we accept this idea of distributed moral agency without anchoring it in human duty, we risk letting the designer completely off the hook.
How so?
Well, if the object is going to do what the object is going to do, why should the designer agonize over telesis? Papanek's framing is vital because it demands courage.
But courage doesn't stop the object from acting on its own.
Maybe not, but without viewing ethics as a profound individual duty, the default state of the designer is subservience to consumerism. The demand for human intent is the only friction we have against the momentum of Kleenex culture.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Focusing purely on the designer's conscious choice implies that neutrality is an option.
I'm not saying it's neutral.
But you're implying a designer could somehow choose not to infuse an object with morality if they just focused on pure utility. Verbeek, building on Bruno Latour's theories, demonstrates that neutrality is mechanically impossible.
Okay, give me an example.
Objects enforce what Latour calls action programs. Consider a very simple example from the literature: a speed bump on a residential road.
Sure, a physical barrier to reduce momentum.
Exactly. If you want a driver to slow down near a school, you have two options. You could put up a sign that says, speed limit 15 mph. That is a script directed at human morality.
Right, it relies entirely on the driver's conscience.
And their willingness to obey the law. But a speed bump, it doesn't ask for your moral cooperation. It lowers your speed through physical geometry.
It forces a behavior.
Right. It doesn't care if you are a responsible citizen or if you are recklessly late for work. In that moment, the piece of asphalt is actively exercising moral agency. It enforces a moral outcome through material means.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You're treating the speed bump as if it organically grew out of the earth. But who put the speed bump there?
Well, city planners, obviously.
Right, a city planner. A community board that made a conscious, moral calculation that the safety of pedestrians supersedes the convenience of drivers. The asphalt is completely inert without that prior human decision.
But once it's there, it acts on its own.
Sure, but let me give you a more modern equivalent to test this idea. Think about the infinite scroll algorithm on a social media platform.
Ah, a highly engineered piece of behavioral design.
Exactly. Does the algorithm have agency? Yes. It forces a behavior. It overrides the user's conscious intention to put the phone down, much like the speed bump forces the car to slow down.
It programs the user's action.
Right, but the root of the ethical crisis isn't the algorithm's autonomous agency. It's the fact that a human designer explicitly chose to prioritize user retention and ad revenue over human well-being. They engineered a manufactured desire.
So you're tying this back to Papanek's telesis?
Precisely. The algorithm is a manifestation of the social order that funded it. The initial moral intent, or lack thereof, is the prime mover. The object is just executing the designer's original moral failure at scale.
That assumes the object only ever executes the intended will perfectly, as a direct one-to-one translation of the designer's mindset.
You don't think it does?
No, because if we look at how these things actually mediate our reality, the mediation goes so much deeper than just forcing a physical action, like slowing down a car. It fundamentally alters human perception.
Okay, explain how.
Well, Verbeek utilizes Don Ide's framework of technological perception to explain this. He splits it into two dimensions, the embodiment relation and the hermeneutic relation.
Ah, right. So in the embodiment relation, the tool essentially vanishes. Like, you aren't looking at your glasses. The glasses become your eyes.
Precisely. The technology withdraws. A visually impaired person using a white cane isn't feeling the cane in their palm, Their sensory perception extends to the tip of the cane.
They feel the texture of the sidewalk directly.
Exactly. The technology becomes an extension of the human body. It completely shapes what you can and cannot perceive, altering your reality without you even noticing the mediator.
And the hermeneutic relation is where the technology demands interpretation, right?
Yes, where technology acts not as a transparent window, but as a translator that turns reality into a sign to be read.
Like the thermometer example?
Right. When you step outside, you feel the warmth of the sun or the chill of the wind on your skin. That is a qualitative, lived, physical experience.
But a thermometer takes that complex sensory reality and translates it into a discrete, quantitative number.
Exactly. It's 72 degrees, or it's 101.4 degrees if we are measuring a fever. It changes our relationship to reality by elevating quantifiable data and diminishing the actual human feeling.
So the mediation is not neutral.
No. It highlights one specific aspect of reality and throws the holistic human experience into the background. It redefines what we consider to be true.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, once again, it completely sidesteps the origin of the technology and the need it serves.
How does it sidestep the need?
Yes, a thermometer changes our perception of warmth into a discrete number. But why did we invent the thermometer? If we are talking about a medical setting where tracking a fever is a life or death necessity, then that hermeneutic translation is deeply ethical.
Okay, but it still changes perception.
It does, but it serves a real human need. Let's look at how that same hermeneutic relation is abused today. Look at the explosion of biometric sleep trackers on smartwatches.
Devices translating your rest into a daily score.
Exactly. For thousands of years, humans knew if they slept well based on a lived qualitative feeling, like, did I wake up rested? Now we have designers creating wearable technology that translates that biological function into a hermeneutic sign.
And gives you a number out of 100?
Right. You wake up feeling fine, but your watch says your sleep score is a 42, and suddenly you feel exhausted and anxious.
So you're saying the intent behind the translation is the issue?
Yes. If that mediation is driven by a tech company convincing us we need to buy their gadgets to understand our own bodies, then the hermeneutic mediation is just a secondary symptom. The primary moral failure is the designer's refusal to distinguish a real need from a manufactured one.
They acted as a good German for the wearable tech industry?
Exactly. Alienating us from our own bodies just to sell a product. That's a compelling argument, but have you considered Verbeek's prime example of technological agency because it completely bypasses the problem of manufactured desire?
I'm listening.
Let's talk about the obstetrician ultrasound.
The technology used to image a fetus during pregnancy. I mean, that unequivocally fulfills a genuine medical need.
Exactly. Under Papanek's framework, the ultrasound is an absolute triumph. It isn't a frivolous gadget. It doesn't serve a manufactured desire.
A designer operating with the utmost moral duty would design the ultrasound. The intent is flawless.
But Verbeek points out that the ultrasound doesn't just passively provide visual information to the doctor. It actively, aggressively reconfigures the entire moral landscape of pregnancy.
Because it changes the cultural ontology of the pregnancy itself. Yes. Think about the reality of pregnancy before the ultrasound. A fetus was experienced primarily, almost exclusively, through the mother's body.
The moral relationship was deeply intertwined with her physical, qualitative experience.
Right. The ultrasound is a hermeneutic technology. It translates sound waves into a visual image on a screen. But in doing so, it visually and conceptually separates the fetus from the mother.
It creates two distinct patients in the examination room.
Exactly. It makes the fetus measurable, observable, and independent in a way it never was before in human history.
So you're saying that even with purely benevolent intent, the object introduces an entirely new set of moral dilemmas that the designer couldn't possibly control.
That is exactly what happens. By changing the reality of the situation, the ultrasound machine invents entirely new moral decisions that simply did not exist before it was plugged in.
Like genetic screenings.
Yeah, it forces expectant parents to make decisions based on medical data, decisions about genetic abnormalities or interventions. The machine forces a choice. It alters the ethics of reproduction.
Okay, I have to admit, the ultrasound example is brilliant. It perfectly isolates how an object can force our hand morally, completely independent of the designer's pristine intent.
Because the morality isn't just in the designer's heart, it is actively happening on the screen of the machine.
I get that, but I would argue that this realization actually deepens rather than replaces Papanek's imperative.
Deepens it? It seems to fundamentally prove that intent cannot control the ethical outcome of an object.
It proves that we cannot control every outcome, yes, but that is exactly why intent matters more than ever. If Verbeek has successfully proven that every single object silently dictates a way of life, then Papanek's demand for rigorous moral responsibility becomes an absolute existential necessity.
So it's no longer just a noble calling.
It is a prerequisite for survival. If we accept your premise that objects have distributed moral agency, then the act of designing an object is literally the act of unleashing a new moral actor into society.
Because the artifacts we are building are simply too powerful to be left to the whims of an unregulated market.
Precisely. If a designer operates like Papanek's good German, blindly creating whatever the market dictates without examining telesis, they aren't just wasting plastic and copper.
They are carelessly flooding our lived environment with rogue moral agents.
Yes. Agents that will quietly program our behavior toward hyper-consumerism, toward isolation, toward environmental collapse. Verbeek's theory of how powerful objects are actually proves why Papanek was right to be so furious at designers who didn't take that power seriously.
Well, that is a fascinating synthesis. Papanek tells us the designer must take responsibility. And Verbeek explains why they have absolutely no choice but to take responsibility, because neutrality is mechanically impossible.
Exactly. Verbeek turns Papanek's should be into an already is. So let's bring our positions together in light of this.
Sure.
My stance remains that ethical design must begin with a fierce, uncompromising moral duty on the part of the human creator. We have to look at the function complex, specifically telesis. We have to demand that design serves genuine human needs and actively rejects the superficial market.
Because giving form to objects means giving form to society.
Right. We need designers who have the courage to choose the right causes precisely because their creations will outlive and outact their original intentions.
And my summary is that responsibility cannot stop at the designer's good intentions or their courage to reject the market. It must encompass a deep recognition of material morality.
We have to engage in the meticulous anticipation of how objects will behave.
Exactly. Anticipating how they will silently program human behavior once they leave our hands. We have to understand that our designs will act as independent agents, continually mediating human perception in ways we cannot fully control.
Well, what we undeniably agree on is the baseline. Design is never, ever neutral. Thoughtless production, compartmentalized thinking, it is a profound moral failure.
We may remain in thoughtful tension over where to point the ethical spotlight, whether we focus heavily on the designer's courage to reject consumerism, or on the intricate anticipation of how objects will mediate reality.
But neither of us accepts the myth of the passive object.
The illusion of the passive tool is dead. Every single object in our environment is actively participating in our moral lives.
Which brings us back to where we started. That beautifully engineered, perfectly smooth, disposable coffee cup sitting on your desk, or the smartphone in your hand.
They aren't just waiting for your instruction.
Right. They are offering you a way to live. They are framing what you care about, what you ignore, what you measure, and how you interact with the people around you.
The question isn't whether they are shaping your reality. The question is how.
There is so much more to explore in the source material regarding these two incredible frameworks, but we will leave it there for you to consider. The next time you pick up a beautifully designed object, ask yourself, are you using it, or is it designing you?